Welcome to another session of our discussions for Autonomous Postgres. I'm Marc Linster, Technical Fellow at DBtune. Today I'm joined by Bruce Momjian, Postgres Evangelist at Enterprise DB, or EDB as it's known, and a long-term member of the Postgres core team. Welcome, Bruce, and thank you for joining me.
Hey, good to be back with you.
Thanks. So, Bruce, tell us first, when did you start working with Postgres and how did you become one of the community leaders?
So we just had our 30th anniversary party in Vancouver last week, and we had a chance to reflect back on the early days of Postgres, where it was basically just an open source project that had been abandoned by, or was very loosely supported by University of California, Berkeley, and a bunch of people who just were looking for an open source relational database started working on the code. And first couple years were slow, and then we kind of got some momentum as we got crash recovery, and then point in time recovery and JSON and so forth. And you've been with us for part of that journey as it's continued to grow, way beyond where we expected.
Great, great. And then how did you get to that role in the community? Like, are you one of the first ones that picked it up 30 years ago in 1996?
Well, when I downloaded it and started using it, I found a lot of bugs real quick. So I sort of reported them, and they said, "Oh, this was fixed 3 months ago. This fixed 2 months ago." So I started to think, if they fix the bugs, why are they not packaging the fixes so people can use them and they don't have to keep reporting the same bugs, basically? So I realized that this project had potential. The software was really nice. The source code was nice, but it needed the leadership. It needed management, and that's, I guess, where I kind of came in, where I figured, hey, if I can get Marc Fournier was super important in setting up all the infrastructure and guiding the project, and between the two of us, we kind of got a community together, a process together to submit bugs, get them fixed, and so forth. And you do that long enough, people start getting interested, and eventually they get excited, and eventually we get to where we are today.
Great, great. So imagine that in the early days, things like stability, you just mentioned it, crash recovery, for example, reliability, and some core database capabilities were like the big concern. When did that shift towards performance and tuning? When about did that happen?
Yeah, we've gone through various uh, stages with Postgres. I mean, I think you've probably seen the slide. The first one is basically, prevent it from crashing. That was the big, the big one, because it came out of an academic environment. So reliability was not a key requirement. So obviously, if you're going to be popular as a relational database, well, you can't be crashing. So that was like number one. Then we sort of moved into a period where we were focusing on SQL standard features. So if I want to move my workload from some other relational database to Postgres, does Postgres have the features that you're going to need? So we spent good number of years doing SQL standard or adding really features that other databases had, to make it possible to port to Postgres. Then the next stage was enterprise capability. So now we had the SQL level feature stuff, but we didn't necessarily have all of the features that an enterprise would need to use the database effectively. So spent a lot of time adding enterprise features. And now I'd say since maybe 2016, we've been in the innovation stage. And that I think has really propelled us because we innovate probably better than certainly any proprietary database can, being open source. So now we're really innovating in a whole bunch of different directions, and that I think is propelling a lot of the excitement about sort of making Postgres number one among developers, most favored, most liked database, and so forth. That's sort of really taking us to a level I never would have expected.
Mhm. Okay, great. So I know AI and Postgres, I mean, obviously Postgres, but Postgres and AI has been a big topic for you for a few years. What do you think are the next major evolutions in this space?
Well, we've been through various sort of this is our next hot topic stages,
Hmm.
and I know you've been part of some of them. So, uh, probably the first one was GIS back in the early
Hmm.
2000s. We were kind of the one of the early, really powerful GIS databases, and then we had full text search, and that was super important. Then we did JSON, and that propelled us really fast, particularly among web developers and
Hmm.
sort of made us appear modern, even though the code base at this point is 40 years old. And then, now it's AI, right? So did we really predict AI? Did we understand AI was going to be this foundational issue? No, we didn't. People would ask about AI years ago. Somebody had written pgvector as an extension, and we'd say, "Oh, just go use that thing," And over time, pgvector became more and more popular. Postgres, now associated with pgvector, became more and more popular, and now we're sort of the go-to AI database, which again we didn't plan on. Although you could argue that Michael Stonebraker 40 years ago at Berkeley predicted that this extendability was going to be key to relational databases. We didn't anticipate that. So going forward, I think we have a bunch of uh, I, I would argue, having worked with AI even just this week, that we really don't know, I think, where AI is going to land in
Hmm.
terms of what it's able to do. There is the standard hype cycle where you have a technology that everyone thinks is going to be amazing, and then it ends up kind of disappointing everyone, and then they kind of bring it back to the level where it should have been at the start. And I'm sure AI is going to go through that same adjustment. It's not just going to keep growing. There is going to be limits to what it's going to be able to do, and then we're gonna have to figure out what those limits are. Uh, I think there's a couple areas. One would obviously be improving the operation of the database. Second would be, allowing AI workloads, and the third, would be sort of democratizing databases, allowing in non-programmers to get involved, in retrieving data that we can't really do right now effectively.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Recently in April, you published a talk about MCP and Postgres. What's your opinion about MCP? Is it real? Is it mature? Or is it just kind of a step in towards where we're eventually going to land? Or is MCP something that we can build on today?
Well, MCP is really, it's basically papering over the limitation of generative AI. Because if you look at my trenches talk, AI, as we all know, requires a lot of training, right? So you train it with huge amounts of data and billions of documents you feed in there, and you adjust the vectors to somehow encode the word combinations that you've seen in all these documents. But the problem and the limitation that really has to be papered over is that's static, right? So it's basically static data that you've recorded. And the idea that we're going to somehow retrain something based on a prompt somebody types in is unrealistic. You can't.
Mhm.
Right? You don't have enough time. The model's too complex. It wouldn't even impact anything because it requires billions of of documents to really make those vectors move anywhere. So the limitation that we've always had, that generative AI always has had, is that it trains on history, but it can't really train on
Mhm.
today. It can't train on today's weather. It can't train on today's product price. It can't train on, um, things like stock price or anything. So how do you bring current data into a task that you need for AI? And that's where MCP kind of comes in. Now we were using RAG as well. RAG would be sort of the way a programmer would say, "Oh, by the way, when you have this prompt, you're going to need this additional information. So I'm going to go get it as a programmer."
Mm.
And all MCP does is to basically say, really brilliant idea. Let's not have the programmer go get this information for RAG because we don't know what the prompt's going to be. Now the generative AI does know what the prompt's going to be. So let's use generative AI after it receives the prompt. They then go searching using semantic search perhaps among some MCP tools, and see if it can figure out, hey, to better answer this prompt, I'm going to need some data from a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically automates what RAG used to do, was to be, okay, every query is going to need the customer location, and every query is going to need the last 10 orders, and well, that only works if you know what the query is going to be. If you know
Mm-hmm.
what the query is going to be, let's let the generative AI do it, and it basically goes out, uses the generative AI, does a lookup in the tool MCP tool table, and says, hey, here's the prompt. Do any of these tools look like they would be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
And if they do, it calls the tool, figures out how to take maybe some parameters from the prompt to fill in the tool's parameters for the function call, makes the function call, gets the data back, and then merges that just like RAG
Mm-hmm.
in with the prompt and then runs it again.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I think, was I don't know who thought of it, but it's a brilliant idea to kind of automate that RAG process into something that's much more dynamic. And I think, yeah, I don't see that as changing too much. There may be a better, even a better way to get this tool data. But I see MCP as sort of a AI generate AI applying AI to RAG uh, data, basically.
Okay. Cool. Cool. So now autonomous Postgres, right? The dream, at least for me, and I think for a couple of other people. But what are your thoughts about it? Is it possible? Is it real? Is it needed?
It's funny because I just got through working with AI and helping me with some basically grammar checking of, decades of blogs, and it worked really well. So what do we really think can be how do we think we can apply AI to the kind of tasks that DBAs use to do, right?
Mhm.
So could you point, certainly we could get to a point where we could point AI at a database schema or at an application and say, hey, can you improve the way this works, right? Or can you improve the tuning parameters I'm using, right? Or can you improve a whole bunch of areas that DBAs typically work in? Now, I think just like any tool, the DBA is still going to have to verify what's going on, because
Mhm.
the database is just too important, I think, to just blindly let AI go do what it's going to do. Even for simple things like grammar checking, it's still kind of it's usually right, but it's not always right. So, um, for me, I see it as a way of really uh, the problem I found is that a DBA typically just has a schema. They've got a bunch of database servers, and they really don't know what to look for. There's just like, okay, there's tons of data out here. There's tons of ways I can improve it. There's tons of tables. There's tons of indexes. What do I do? And I would hope that we're close to the point where AI could kind of look at that and say, okay, today I would look over here. It looks like there's a problem there. Looks like you can
Nice.
optimize this. This schema really needs to be redesigned. And when I look at the way that access patterns are, or hey, we could create a tool that would allow salespeople to issue English language queries that would get them information to
Mhm.
prevent a lot of stuff. Um, so I see it as just another tool kind of that's a lot more powerful. I think the big change for me for AI is its statistical nature, because we've been able to, you and I have talked for years, how would you automate tuning of Postgres, or how would you automate or converting from Oracle syntax to Postgres or whatever.
Mhm.
And we always have rules. We're always like, okay, if it's between here and here, 20% here, 20, right. And the problem, and anything you can program with rules is great, because it always works the same. You know exactly what to do. But where
Mhm.
we've always gotten stuck historically is, what do you do when the rules, you can't make a rule? Like when it's more like, well, this sometimes and this other times and so forth. And how do you kind of figure that out? And I think what AI does, because it's a basically statistical sampling of words or statistical sampling of patterns, is able to tackle some of these problems that do not have clear rules,
Okay.
but are more statistical in nature, where you're kind of like, there's something here, and how do I sort of take that pattern and convert it to something that I can't create a rule for, but statistically I know that it should go in this direction.
Okay. Interesting. So, and you already mentioned it in some of the things that you said where, you know, when we're talking about autonomous Postgres, we're looking at AI that helps the DBA, right? But we're also looking at AI kind of, or Postgres with AI. So Postgres that's easier to use for the, let's say the citizen analyst, right?
Yeah.
And I think the third dimension is Postgres as a platform for AI because Postgres has transactional data, it's an asset store, it's really good. In this triangle of things, where do you foresee the next exciting developments?
Oh. We're kind of moving at all those in the same time. I don't think Postgres is a platform for AI. I don't see anything on the horizon beyond PG Vectorize, which is another.
Mhm,
I think it has the PG Vectorize, I believe, has some hardware acceleration that I'd like to see become more common, because GPUs can make vector operations obviously much more efficient.
mhm,
So I say we really need to go in that direction. In terms of allowing non-programmers to interact with the database, I think that's, I'm working on a talk about that. Can AI write SQL, right? So
mhm,
I'm gonna sort of spend the next couple months sort of digging into what things can we do to make AI more effective in writing SQL and bringing data um, to non-programmers, because right now you have to write SQL, you have to have some kind of data tool to get the data out, and it works, but it's an extra layer. So
mhm,
what can we do to remove that layer and really democratize the data a little better? I actually EDB worked on a book actually related to that, and
mhm,
that's exactly what I said in that book, that I see democratization of data being much more
mhm,
a bigger thing. In terms of managing the data, it's going to be a whack-a-mole, right? It's going to be a whole bunch of things. There's not going to be one thing that's going to sort of take us to there, because it's going to be index recommendations, it's going to be schema changes, it's going to be
mhm,
config parameters, it's going to be health check, it's going to be, advisor. So just like when we look at, Postgres Enterprise Manager, which has tons of EDB tool, has a tons of things that make DBAs better, and gives advice on stuff and identifies problems. It's going to be a whack-a-mole where we're going to be just kind of all over the place, kind of throwing AI at the problem and
mhm,
trying to see, hey, is this going to help? Is this going to help? So I don't really know there. I don't see it. I don't see sort of a nirvana there where we're going to just get to a point where it's just going to take care of everything and we don't have to
mhm.
do anything. I don't see that. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of whack-a-mole of getting this part of the database better, getting this part of the database, making the DBA more efficient here, more efficient there. And again, it's really good when we don't have rules and we have some sort of a statistical, because you and I, we used to have that problem with converting Oracle like syntax to Postgres, and you could create rules. Okay, but anything that was more complicated, it would fall over, and then you'd have to have a rule for that, and then, oh, we need a rule for when this happens.
Mhm.
And after a
Yeah.
while, you have so many rules, you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. AI is really, at least statistical parts of AI are very well tuned to do exactly that. To have a trade-off of multiple constraints and
Right.
in very difficult decision spaces, find the optimum, which may not be the best on all dimensions, but it's if you take it all together, it's probably the best thing. So, as a wrap up, let's go back to Postgres, the open source, and the community. So, several years ago, you gave a talk, Will Postgres Live Forever? That got a lot of attention. Are you still optimistic, and what's next for the community?
Wow. Yeah, I gave the sort of cake cutting talk in Vancouver last week, and I had a chance to sort of reflect on, we're 30 years in, the source code is 40 years. Do we go another 30 years, right? Or however long.
Mhm.
And the funny thing is when I started to think of it, I started to think back about the anniversaries I had been through. And we were in year 10. We're like, why are we here? Like, it was a very odd thing to have a project last that long, and all these people were brought together really working on the software. Wasn't clear we're going to go another 10 years. And year 20, we had some momentum, but again, it wasn't clear. Now we're year 30. A lot of the a lot of the impediments and barriers that we used to have to where we were to our growth are kind of gone. They've all faded over time, partially because the market's changed. They haven't been as flexible. Postgres's sort of long-term vision and long-term discipline about where we're going has paid off. So uh, when I look out at the horizon, when I looked at year 10, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of things. Who knows? Year 20, I'm like, oh, we seem to be doing well, but there's still some bumps in the road. We're not sure. Year 30, I'm not sure where the bumps are. I think one of the focuses that I kind of explained in Vancouver was that Postgres, I think one of its big benefits is it has a real focus on users. It has a real focus on
Mm.
service to our user base, and sort of a humility as we work as a team to find the best solutions, whatever they are, whether they're our ideas or someone else's. And what I basically said was, as long as the community continues to focus on service and doesn't become sort of embroiled in very territorial or very what we call selfish, sort of approaches to things. There are very few projects that have that sort of, I think, vision, and I think that has served us really well. And as long as we sort of maintain that outlook, we're always going to be flexible. We're always going to be looking for new opportunities. We're always going to be bringing in new ideas that maybe other people can't bring in. And that's really what's brought us, I think, to where we are. And that's what's going to take us forward.
Well, great, great. I'm optimistic about Postgres. I think what you and the other members of the team have achieved over the last 30 plus years is really fantastic. So thank you very much for the conversation today, and for everybody else listening to this. If you have suggestions or things that you would like us to talk about, send us an email at autonomouspostgresql@dbtune.com. Bruce, thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Great talking to you today.